What's up YouTube, I'm Guy, and today I wanted to put together a quick little comparison video of two watches that I like quite a bit. First things first, if you happen to be following the channel for a long time, you might remember that one of my first videos was a comparison of the Hamilton Khaki Field and the Seiko SNZG13. After that review was out for a while, I started getting a lot of comments from people suggesting that I should actually compare the Hamilton to the Seiko SNZG13, or one of its brothers or sisters. That it would make for a better comparison because at a minimum those two watches are more stylistically similar than the SNZG13 is to the Hamilton. Those people were absolutely right, and I also recognized that when I was doing that review, but I didn't have access to the SNZG watch, so I did that review and it is what it is. Now I do have the SNZG, so we're going to go ahead and do that comparison. I do have individual reviews of both the Hamilton and the Seiko 5 SNZG13 on the channel. So if you want to go back into my library and check out those videos, I do encourage you to do that. It might be helpful in giving you a little bit of background and foundational information about these two watches before we discuss the comparison. Also, really quick, I did want to mention that if you're interested in either of these watches, down in the notes or the description of this video, I will have links to them on through my Amazon affiliate account. If you click on those links and you buy either of these watches, or anything else for that matter, I get a small commission, which helps me out a great deal. So, if you want to support the channel, the easiest way that you can do that is to click on my affiliate links and go ahead and shop, buy anything that you would have normally bought anyway, and I get a few bucks. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure that you guys realize that that's an option, and I would greatly appreciate it if you guys did support the channel by doing that. Now, to get into the actual comparison of these two watches, first things first, everyone is probably already aware that the main difference between these two watches is the price point. They're both military-style field watches. They both have a black field watch dial. The aesthetic is very similar. But the prices are pretty different. The Seiko 5 SNZG13 comes in at a price point of about $120 as of December 2017, and the Hamilton Khaki Field Automatic comes in at a price point of about $400 right now. I should also mention that this isn't a perfect apples-to-apples comparison because there is a 42mm Hamilton Khaki Field, and since the SNZG is a 42mm watch, that really would be the best comparison. But unfortunately, I just don't have access to one of those Hamiltons. This is the one that I have, and aside from the size differences, I think that both of the Hamiltons would be pretty much the same, so I still think it's fair to do this comparison. I should also probably preface this by saying that I prefer smaller watches. So the fact that the Hamilton Khaki Field Automatic that I have is a 38mm case with 20mm lugs is a huge plus in my book. Speaking of the dimensions of the watches, I'm going to go ahead and give you that information about both of these watches really quickly, and then we'll move on to more of the comparison. The Hamilton comes in at a case diameter of 38mm with 20mm lugs, a thickness of roughly 11mm, and a lug-to-lug width from the top of the case to the bottom of the case of 47mm. On the other hand, the Seiko 5 has a case diameter of 42mm with a lug width of 22mm. Its thickness is slightly thicker at 12mm, and overall from the top of the case to the bottom, or the lug-to-lug width, it comes in at 49mm. So, if you're going to pick either of these watches, obviously size is going to be a factor, unless you're thinking about the 42mm Hamilton, which would be, again, a more apples-to-apples comparison, but being as how I don't have that, this is what we're talking about. I should preface all of this again by saying that I do prefer the smaller size of the Hamilton. It's going to be a big check mark on the side of the Hamilton for me personally. I think that the Seiko 5 is a little bit bulky on the wrist. It's a little bit bigger than I prefer, so, keep that in mind. I am probably slightly biased when we're talking about these two watches because of that in and of itself. Now, the first things that I want to discuss that are significantly different between these two watches is the movements. The Hamilton features their H10 series movement, and the Seiko 5 SNZG13 has the 7S26 movement. In my opinion, I think that the H10 movement is quite a bit better. First of all, it has hand winding and hacking. It has a much longer power reserve at about 80 hours versus, I believe, roughly 40 hours on that Seiko. And probably the biggest thing for me, because I care about accuracy quite a bit, is that on average, you're going to have a more accurate watch with the Hamilton H10 movement. Now, hold on a second. People are going to jump down my throat saying, I have a Seiko 5 with the 7S26 movement, and it is super accurate. I know, I've had them too. It happens. You know what I mean? Like, I get it. But from the factory, the technical specifications on those two movements are as such. The Hamilton has an accuracy range from the Hamilton factory of -10 seconds to +15 seconds per day. On the other hand, the Seiko 5 SNZG, or the 7S26 movement in particular, has an acceptable accuracy range from the factory of -20 seconds per day to +40 seconds per day. So while you can get a very accurate Seiko 5, I know, I've had them too, by and large, on average, you're just going to have a more accurate Hamilton watch. It's just the way it is. It's a fact. There's no arguing it, and I don't want to debate it in the comments if I can help it. So let me just put that out there right now. I'm of the opinion that you are going to have a more accurate H10 movement than 7S26 movement on average, if we had hundreds of these watches to test side by side. So I do think that the Hamilton movement is quite a bit better. Does it justify the almost $300 price difference in and of itself? Probably not. If you don't care about that extra power reserve in particular, you might not care one way or the other. But I think that, again, it is a better movement and I do prefer it. Another thing to compare about these watches is the dial and handset. They're both very typical field watch dial layouts, and I'm a big, giant fan of field watches. So while they're similar in style and aesthetic, I think that the dial, and in particular the hands on the Hamilton, are quite a bit nicer looking. It's a little bit more refined. It looks a little bit more classy. Now, if you just want a down and dirty, super simple field watch dial, maybe the Seiko is the right one for you. But the Hamilton is just a little bit nicer. It has a little bit different of a texturing and finishing on that dial. It has quite a bit of character. The handsets are also quite a bit different. The Hamilton hands are polished stainless steel with a little red tip up at the second hand, which I like quite a bit. On the other hand, the handset of the Seiko 5, they're just solid white painted, and I don't know, it looks a little, I don't know how I would describe that. I guess it looks a little cheap, if I'm being honest, and I don't want to say that in a huge negative way. It's not a cheap watch. It's not made cheaply. I just really don't like the solid white hands. For me, it's just, a negative. You may or may not disagree. Now, one big plus for the Seiko is the Loom. Seiko's Lumibrite Loom is, of course, legendary, and the Hamilton Loom is borderline garbage, if I'm being honest. It's not good at all. I'll obviously roll in some video of both watches side by side and show you that Loom. But yeah, the Hamilton Loom, no good. I've had several Hamiltons come through here now, and I've never been impressed with the Loom on their watches. The Seiko also has a little pip of Loom on the second hand, which looks nice, and the Hamilton second hand is unloomed at all. I will say, though, in defense, I guess, of bad Loom in general, I don't personally care about Loom all that much. I rarely have to read my watches in low light or dark conditions. It's just really not a huge factor in my buying decision-making process. So I personally wouldn't hold it against the Hamilton or any other watch that doesn't have great Loom, because it's really just not a huge factor for me. But on paper, if we're doing some comparisons, the Seiko Loom is obviously legendary. It's outstanding. Another plus side for the Seiko for someone might be that it has a day and date complication, whereas the Hamilton only has the date. Again, for me, it's not a huge factor. I can live without the day. I do like all of my watches to have the date complication. Generally speaking, there are some watches without dates that I do like, and I would be more than happy to have them. But yeah, I like to have the date as well, and both of these watches have that. But maybe having the day would be a plus for somebody if they were, going through the decision-making process of which one of these watches do they prefer. Now, also when we're talking about the dial, Again, I said the Hamilton's is a little bit more refined looking. Something that I think comes off looking kind of off on the Seiko dial. It has this overlaid or insert chapter ring. It just looks like this weird kind of wafer out at the edges of the dial. And it just, for me, is not the most attractive looking accessory, I guess. Accessory is probably not the right word, but you know what I mean. It's not great looking. I would prefer it if the chapter ring was just painted on the dial. You know, if there was any sort of embellishments that it was actually a piece of the dial and not this weird sort of inlaid insert sitting on top of the dial the way that they have it there. I find that to be a little bit of a negative. Again, not a big deal, but, you know, if we're talking about aesthetics, I think, again, that the Hamilton dial just looks much more refined. It's a little bit more classy. That may be a negative for you, though. You know, if you're looking for a field watch that's just a tool and rugged and something you can beat up on, you know, maybe you don't want something that looks classy or refined or elegant. But, you know, in my opinion, I like the look of the Hamilton's dial and the handset all quite a bit. Now, when we're talking about the case of the watches, they're very, very similar. The quality of the finishing, you know, I can't really tell a great big difference. I would say maybe the Hamilton's finishing is a little bit better. Hamilton does brushing really, really well, and the majority of the Hamilton case is brushed, with the exception of the smooth bezel around the crystal. That's a, you know, kind of high polished piece. On the other hand, the Seiko case is more or less brushed on the bezel. With the edges, there's a little bit of this polishing that you don't even really see very well, but the sides of the case on the Hamilton are polished. It's, you know, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Which do you prefer? You know, I don't know. I think that they're very similar, and it's hard for me to determine which one is better quality in finishing and fit and finish. I will say that I prefer the look of the case of the Hamilton a little bit better, and it's going to go back again to having this sort of refined, more elegant look than the Seiko. The Seiko is a little beefier, it's a little more rugged feeling, and you know, if that's what you're going for, then again, this is going to be a plus for you, but for me it's a little bit of a negative. And you know, it's another check mark in the box for the Hamilton, in my opinion. Now, the Hamilton has a sapphire crystal, and the Seiko has their hard Lex crystal. Which is better? I think that, generally speaking, the sapphire is better. It's more scratch resistant. The hard Lex crystal is also supposed to be a decent crystal, but I would, you know, prefer, generally speaking, a sapphire crystal, and I think that that's a plus for the Hamilton, with one minor exception. Hamilton's crystals have a lot of glare, and despite the fact that neither of these watches are coated with any sort of anti-glare coating, the Seiko just has less glare for some reason. I don't know if it's because the Hamilton crystal is slightly domed. Maybe the sapphire is just a shinier material. I'm not sure what it is, but that could be a plus for the Seiko. There's less glare on that crystal, despite the fact that maybe it's not quite as scratch resistant as the sapphire on the Hamilton watch. The other big differences between these watches come from the bracelets, and while they're finished relatively similarly, they're both brushed bracelets, I think that the Hamilton bracelet is a little bit better. First of all, it has solid end links versus the hollow end links on the Seiko, and the clasp is made a little bit better on the Hamilton. It's a thicker material. The swing arm blades are thicker machined blades, and the Seiko has that, you know, kind of cheap stamped metal. The only plus side for the Seiko clasp is that the bracelet, I guess, is that the clasp has more micro adjustment holes. And I'm a big fan of having more options when it comes to your bracelets, in particular micro adjustment holes and sizing options. And in that regard, the Seiko 5 SNZG13 wins. But overall, the Hamilton Khaki Field bracelet is a little bit better. It's a little bit thinner of a material, though not so thin as to feel cheap or you know, rickety. The thing is, it wears more comfortably. The whole package of the Hamilton, it's lighter weight, it wears more comfortably on the wrist, it wears a little bit lower to the wrist, and you know, I just find it to be more comfortable, basically. And a lot of that has to do with the bracelet. I think that the Hamilton's bracelet is generally a nicer bracelet. So that's basically my comparison of these two watches. Overall, I would give the Hamilton, you know, of the two, the gold star, if you will. I would say that it is a better watch, whether or not it's a almost $300 better value. certainly could be debated. You know, $100 to $120 for the SNZG13 is an excellent price for, any watch, especially a decent quality watch like that watch is. So mostly I think it's going to boil down to your stylistic tastes, which aesthetic you like better. For me, the Hamilton is a much more attractive watch. The movement is, in my opinion, quite a bit better. So overall, that's the one that I favor, but both of these watches are great watches, without a doubt. I hope you guys enjoyed this quick comparison video on the Hamilton Khaki Field Automatic 38mm and the Seiko 5 SNZG13. I appreciate you tuning in, as always. And yeah, do me a favor, help out the channel by clicking the like button, sharing this video. Of course, if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. And in the description or the notes for this video is a list of ways that you can help support the channel. All right, guys, have a good one, take care, and thanks again.